Hi, my name is Lisa Ann De Garcia, and welcome back to this episode of Restore, Reorganize, and Rewire, where we talk about everything brains. Today, I have my friend Renee Mohr, and she is a holistic health practitioner. She also has an adult son who had autism, but she was able to recover him. She also has suffered from seizures and other disorders herself, so she is going to share with us what her tips and tricks were for helping her son, herself, and the rest of her family. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Check it out. So I was very curious to hear about your story of your son, actually, because my son is 23. How old is your son?
31.
31. And
Yes.
so, yeah, just tell me about that.
Actually, he was diagnosed late. He was almost 16, and he could speak like 3 or 4 words, and then he'd get really frustrated and, start getting overwhelmed and couldn't get out what he was talking about. He'd had asthma for 15 years, croup, which they said is supposed to go away after like 2 or 3. He at 15, he was still had croup.
That's a cough, like the croup cough.
Well, it's more than the cough. It would actually go into we had to take him into the hospital like 4 times a week.
Oh.
Okay, because he was so bad that he just couldn't breathe, and there was so much mucus and phlegm building up all the time. And so he couldn't go outside to play. All right, he couldn't go to hang out with friends. He didn't have friends because he missed so much school. And even when we homeschooled, he couldn't go do activities with other kids because just being outside, it was always, oh my gosh, if you're outside, you're going to have an asthma attack, you're going to get a croup attack. And so, he was really frustrated. We were really frustrated. He was sick all the time, and the only thing that was given to us is steroids. Give him more steroids and more steroids. And he couldn't live. And then, since he could only speak like 3 or 4 words at a time, he couldn't get out in his head what he was trying to communicate to us. So then he'd get really frustrated and angry. And, it got really bad, showed up in his schoolwork. He just couldn't do it because he had questions, couldn't vocalize those questions. And then he would start to maybe understand something, but he couldn't explain it. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse.
How was his comprehension?
Amazing.
So auditory, he seemed to understand what you were saying, but he just couldn't spit it out.
Right. And because of the frustration and then the stress and being overwhelmed, we had doctors telling us that he was going to live with us forever. He was going to never drive. He would never have friends. He would never have a job. He just couldn't socialize. And, it was basically,
I know they're so hopeful.
Right. It was, and so we developed a saying, I can't wait for them to tell me what he'll never do, because he has smashed everything they said that he would never, and has done everything and so much more. And it was really about getting those toxins out of him. I mean, even for him, a toxin is as much as lavender. The essential oil lavender, what I learned is if you have a reaction to most people it's calming, it smells good. He gets higher than a kite. It is like you gave him a big joint and he smoked it, and mentally he is not there. He is in some other realm, and he's being goofy, and he's just can't get his words and his thoughts together.
That's really interesting because, obviously a lot of people associate the essential oils.
Right.
And there is a saying that, what is it, that one man's medicine is another man's poison.
Exactly.
And so, that's always interesting because there's not a blanket anything.
No.
Which makes things really difficult.
So, some kids have a lot of difficulty with phenols that are a natural part of our foods and our vegetables and our fruits. Some kids have problems with salicylates. Okay. And so salicylates, again, it's natural, but
it's just whatever the biochemistry, it's not able to process things correctly.
Exactly. And so, like you said, one person's food or medicine can be another person's poison. And so we stay clear of anything that has lavender in it because he cannot function. You give him any lavender, he smells lavender. It's in soaps, shampoos.
It is very strong. I personally do not prefer it because it's like super overpowering.
Yeah, I learned about it just simply because I noticed I was using a lot of essential oils for a while and helping with coughs, and lavender is one of the go-to oils to help people calm down, or if like you have a burn, you know, it helps to take that burn and stinging out of it. And any time he'd be around it, I was just asking my sister-in-law, because she was a nurse, and I'm like, have you ever heard of lavender people like being high? And she's like, oh no, he's just making this up. And then she saw him one day at the beach. He also has strawberry blonde hair, so he has a lot of red in his hair and a lot of red in his beard. And he, 10 minutes without a shirt on, and he's burnt. So we put coconut oil, she put coconut oil and lavender on his back. And she couldn't believe how goofy he was and not making sense when he was talking. And she's like, oh my gosh. I go, now see what I mean? What do you think? And she's like, you weren't kidding. So we started keeping, those foods away, but it was a lot of toxins that had built up in his body over time from different foods and from different medications that were keeping him from being able to communicate and to express himself and to socialize and to really allow those gifts that kids who are neurodivergent have, that to really shine.
When did you start realizing that it was like the toxins, or how did that whole thing play out? And at what point? Was it like right away once he was diagnosed, or was it like still?
After he was diagnosed, we had an EEG done, and we took him down to the Drake of Biomed in Riverside, California. And so they did an EEG, we had a psychological evaluation done, and once we got all the results back, they said, well, he's being diagnosed very late, we don't normally see any progress, and so we walked out of there just really dumbfounded. And fortunately I found Talk About Curing Autism, TACA, and they had a section where they were referring people to different doctors in your area. We got to see one of the doctors, and he was the one who said, a lot of these kids, it's toxic overload. And finding out, and this was like early 2000s, so all the testing, of course, insurance wasn't covering, so it was really difficult to get the testing done, and then you got to pay for the results and the reading, and now you got to, okay, what does this mean? And so it was taking different foods out. The doctor told us the first thing they usually see is gluten and dairy. So I threw out everything in the house. I mean, my husband walked out of that visit with the doctors, and he's like, I'm not getting rid of this food. That's going to be too expensive, and I'm going to starve. And I just looked at him, and I thought, I don't care. Our son needs help. And I threw everything in the cupboards out. I dumped it out in the trash. I sold all of our flour and our wheat and got rid of the pastas and started looking up recipes and what does gluten-free mean? What are all the different words for gluten? I mean, trying to read the ingredients, and I didn't know caramel color at the time was gluten. I didn't know natural flavorings could be gluten.
Or MSG. Or
Right. All these different little acronyms and, words that there was like over 100 different words that they said, oh yeah, these can be gluten. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how are we going to find anything or fix anything? I'm like, I need to go back and start making everything from scratch. So I looked up a whole bunch of different recipes online, and I started ordering my foods from places that do deliveries. We lived in the Mojave Desert, so we had to drive down to the ports of LA to get our food because we were such a small town, they didn't do deliveries. And that's where I started.
And in the early 2000s, it was even hard. I remember it was so hard to find anything that was gluten-free.
Right. It wasn't in the grocery stores yet. Okay.
Just like a few things in Whole Foods, and that was like it.
Yeah, and we didn't have a Whole Foods in our town, and the closest Whole Foods was 2 hours away.
Mm.
So I had to make everything from scratch, figure out how to make a pizza crust gluten-free.
That would stay together and not completely fall
Right, and
apart.
crumble, and that he would eat.
Mm-hmm.
Because
the texture is very important.
the texture, but he's a big foodie, so it's all about the taste. And, when you were starting out in early 2000s, everything just was so dry and crumbled apart. And I was like, what's amaranth? What's tapioca starch? Guar gums and rice flour. How do you use rice flour? Can't use any yeast.
Did you find that the gluten-free, dairy-free did anything for him?
At the time, I didn't think it did. It did help with him not having as much mucus. Okay.
Like the dairy part.
Yeah, and so that was helpful. But we've since learned that he has MTHFR.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you know, that's a gene SNP. And they started him on B12 shots, which we had compounded especially for him. And we'd give him a B12 shot like every other day. The difference was night and day. He went from being, learning, special needs to within about 3 days, he wasn't blinking his eyes all the time and not looking at us. He was looking us in the eye.
It was the subcutaneous injections, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And so we were like, wow, what's going on? And then the doctor called us up at the end of the week, and he's like, hey, I was just wanting to check in with you and see how things are going since we added the B12 shots. And I go, oh, we haven't been to the hospital all week. And then I was like, oh, I haven't had to get up in the middle of the night because he's having such bad asthma attacks. I go, he hasn't used his inhaler all week long. And the doctor goes, sounds like we're on the right track.
Mm.
And then my husband came up to me and he says, you're never going to believe this. He goes, this must be just, he's having a good day. I go, what? He goes, he actually looked at me. I go, what are you talking about? He goes, our son. He's like, he looked me in the eyes when I was talking to him. He was like there. I could tell he was paying attention. And I was like, really? Because he was always blinking his eyes and he couldn't hold a focus. He was always wandering off with his eyes looking around. You had no idea if he even heard what you were saying. And he goes, yeah, this is strange. Maybe it's just, this is a good day. And then it kept being like that. And so we were like, oh my gosh, wow. And the doctor's like, yeah, he's got MTHFR. Now, we're going to do some testing to see if he has any of the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
And does he need glutathione? And see what else he has going on. But for him, diet was huge. Also detoxifying him. So Epsom salt baths, we did lots of those. Adding lemon to water, no sodas, no candies. When he lived with us, he only ate whatever I made.
It's like preventing the toxins from going in, but then also at the same time trying to get the toxins out.
Yeah.
So Epsom salt baths, what else did you do maybe?
Well, we did Epsom salt baths quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I also would put essential oils on his feet to open up pathways and help drain. So all the gallbladder, he has gallbladder problems. He doesn't absorb or use fats. His cholesterol, he always has really struggled to have a normal range of cholesterol. And he can eat like there's no tomorrow. He's one of those kids that was a beanpole that could eat 5,000 calories, and he looks like he's starving to death. And so we added taurine to his diet to help support the gallbladder. And then he is on a high omega diet and a high cholesterol, but it does have to be the good fats, the coconut oil, the olive oil, tallow, ghee. It can't be any of the other processed fats. His body just cannot handle it, can't use it, doesn't know what to do. And so now he's 6'6" and weighs about 240 pounds. Whereas before he stopped growing at about 14, when boys are usually growing a lot, eating $1,000 a month in food.
So do you still have to use the taurine, or did his body kind of figure things out?
He hasn't used the taurine, I think, for quite a few years. Since he's been out here in Utah, it's been maybe, it's been just since he's supporting himself and eating for himself. He does stick to still very basic foods, so he'll buy a big bag of rice, roast up some chickens, and then steam like some vegetables, and that's what he'll eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Or he'll do some steak, or he'll use salmon. But he doesn't use a lot of the processed foods and box foods because he can feel the difference when he eats it, and just not being clear mind, being really fatigued and tired and down. So he's pretty good about that. But since he's been out here, he hasn't used the taurine, so I'm thinking his body kind of figured it out, maybe needed some support for a short term. And
to kind of kickstart.
Yeah, it's been able to kickstart some things.
When so you used the Epsom salt. Did he ever do any of the traditional chelation protocols, or because of the DMPS and DMSA, right, and there's all kinds of.
We didn't do that, and it was simply just due to cost. Unfortunately, because of where we lived, our insurance deemed us out of area. And so
we're out of everybody's area.
Right. And so everything was pretty much cash. And some things we couldn't get and some things we just couldn't afford. Because at the same time we were dealing with my seizures, and we were trying to figure out this whole world of autism and how to support him the best and how to help him the best. And so it was pretty expensive, and if we would have lived in another town 2 hours away, they would have covered 90%. But because of where we live, they wouldn't cover anything.
Yeah. It's got to be some kind of discrimination, right?
Yeah, you would think so.
Location discrimination.
And, it's not like we chose to live there. We were told, this is where my husband's job is going to be. But the insurance that we're providing you doesn't cover the area that we're asking you to live in.
So at what point did you start noticing him shifting or coming out, or how did that?
He was 15 when he was diagnosed, and then he was 16 when he stopped having the asthma attacks, when he started looking us in the eyes, and we got him on digestive enzymes to help his gut.
Was the B12 during that time, or when he was little?
No, the B12 was all during that time.
Oh, okay.
It took us 18 months to find a digestive enzyme that worked for him. Because we needed one that had lipase in it. And at the time, all of them were having basically for dairy and wheat, the enzymes in it for that.
Oh, but the lipase wasn't in there?
The lipase wasn't.
Because I would say it seems like it's in all of them now.
Now it is, yeah, but back then, the only one we found is when doTERRA first came out. They were the first one I found that had lipase in it.
Oh, really?
Yes, and so that helped him so much.
Oh, yeah, with all that gallbladder stuff.
Yeah, so then he was able to start, he really grew. He grew 4 inches in 2 months after we started him on the digestive enzymes and the B12. We started about the same time, and his legs were killing him. But
because he was growing so fast?
Because he was growing so fast. He grew 4 inches in 2 months. And so his body all of a sudden was just like, yeah, you've given me some things I need. Here it goes.
One of the first books that I got when my son was diagnosed was the Dr. McCandless's book, Children of Starving Brains. And I read it, but the title is what just stuck in me, because it's like they're, even if you were giving them, feeding him everything
Right.
perfect, organic, whatever, his body was not breaking it down and
Right.
assimilating everything, and so his brain and everything was essentially just starving.
They actually did an EEG on him because, I mean, he wasn't growing as a 14-year-old boy.
Mm-hmm.
That's when boys are growing the most, and they're eating you out of house and home. And they found that his brain was shutting down to try to keep his other organs going. And
and
so
an EEG, I
different
wonder how
different
they do
parts of
that.
his brain were shutting down. And the brain is mostly fat,
Mhm.
and he was like skin and bone, even though he was eating lots of high fat foods, but he just wasn't assimilating it. So once we got the digestive enzyme that had lipase in it, that was a game changer.
Oh, yeah. So it was able to break it down
Yeah.
in a form that he was able. Actually, yeah, there's an omega oil that we use that's like pre-digested, so it's in a monoglyceride form, so
Right.
you can absorb it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I think that a lot of doctors and some of these are missing is the gene SNPs that each of us have. Okay, just because you have all the same organs in the same skeletal system doesn't mean it works all the same way. And so his gallbladder needs a lot of support and added help. And I just was able to figure that out because I spent all of my time on like webinars with different doctors and hearing about the research of this and how different tests that they were coming out with really what they were seeing. And I was like, oh, okay, that's one thing, that he needs. Well, let me talk to his doctor about this. But, I was spending 8-10 hours a day.
And the hard part is that so, like, every single one of our kids, like, my son in some ways, like, sort of sounds like your son, but it's completely different.
Right.
And all of our kids, because basically what they're doing is they're just taking all these symptoms, lumping them together, and calling it autism, right?
Right.
But instead, what your son probably more had, he had MTHFR and some kind of a fat assimilation issue, right? Like that would be more of an appropriate diagnosis, where my son, who knows like exactly what the little thing is, but they're lumping it together. So even though we go to tech, or we go to, we had a Dan doctor in the beginning,
Right.
like, back in Dr. Rimland days and
Yeah.
everything. But even though the doctors can be kind of general and say, okay, well, here are some of the commonalities, but it's so different. Every single kid.
Every single one is.
So that's why it's so hard.
Yes. And, now they've got pandas, and then they have ADD, ADHD, OCD, all these acronyms for all this.
And they threw them all together.
Right. They lump them all together. And it just makes it, I think, more confusing.
It was actually easier back when they still had Asperger's and they had PDD, because my son was originally diagnosed with PDD, I don't know why, but then eventually just autism. But at least when they tried to have like different labels, it sort of seemed like you had like, okay, here's some
right. A smaller
symptoms
group of people
that were more similar.
Yeah, he was diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, Asperger's, and autism.
Like, okay.
And so, but I spent 10 hours a day, 6 days a week on webinars researching, because I was seeing what he was doing at home. This is a kid that taught himself ancient dead languages.
Ooh.
That he would speak, read it, and write. And I'm like, no, that's not real. That's something you made up. We had a big homeschooling group in our area, and we had a lady there who taught Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. And he was telling me this was all Hebrew writing that he was doing, and he was telling me what it says. And I was like, yeah, right. So I take in all these papers, and I show her this, and I said, my son just made these scribbles up. And she's looking at it, and she's like, I've never seen such a clean translation. What did he do? And I go, he's 10. She goes, I want to meet your son right now. And I'm like, you mean he's really writing words? This really means it. She's like, oh, yeah. And I go, you've got to be kidding me. He took Latin, Greek, and Hebrew for 4 years, She couldn't believe, she loved talking to him and him reading books and translating it, reading, writing it. And I've asked him, I go, what is it about those languages that for you it just seems like so easy? He goes, well, it has patterns, Mom.
Oh yeah, it's like.
And I go, well, what about English? No, there's
There's
too
no-
many exceptions in English. He goes, English doesn't make any sense.
There's no patterns in them.
He's like, but Chinese and Russian and Samoan, and he's like, yeah, I can see all the patterns in them. It's pretty easy once you follow
So what
those.
does he do now?
He's actually an industrial electrician.
Oh, does he? Well, I'm sure there's a lot of patterns in there somehow.
Yeah, so he's, we go to church with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So he is working on one of the projects that they have, but he's worked in data banks, and he's worked at oil refineries, and he's worked in many different job sites. And he's pretty good at, because he can isolate patterns. And then he sees what is done in repetition. And it's not just in languages, it's whether it's teaching in math, whether it's games, whether it's reading history. If you get him started on history, he can talk your ear off for hours and hours.
Well, history does repeat itself, right?
Yes, unfortunately. And so that's just one of his gifts that, he was given, that since we figured out quite a bit of what's happened, it's really been allowed to shine. And he's actually helped a lot of different people who learn totally differently, because he can explain, say, math by playing a card game, and they'll understand their math. And now all these young men are around him going, oh, that's what they were trying to do. That's what they're trying to say. And so he's like, yeah, if you do this, this, and this, this is how you're going to find out. Oh, that makes so much sense now.
I've always wondered, like, let's say with my son, because communication is really hard for him.
Right.
He's extremely visual. Like, he has just like a Rolodex of pictures in his head, and he's
Yep.
just completely that pictorial, whatever. But I always wonder if he gets to the point where he is more verbal, like how he would express to us what he was feeling or experiencing during this time that he was having trouble communicating. So when your son got to a point where he was speaking well, did he ever say anything, and like, did he remember having trouble?
He remembered, and for a long time he didn't talk about it because it was like so overwhelming. As he got older, he would tell us, and some of the things were really hard to hear, because it was, now looking back, it was the side effects of the food or the medicines or whatever that he would see things on the walls and in hallways, and that's what he was reacting to. Some people thought, oh my gosh, he's crazy. But he wasn't seeing just somebody walk down the hallway. He was seeing, creatures coming out of the air that seemed like he was being attacked, or like my husband or I were being attacked. And he was hearing, he has exceptionally good hearing, and so he could hear people in a different room, and if they were starting to have a disagreement, but it was echoed, so it seemed really loud to him. And when you have all that happening all at the same time, I could understand now why it would be so overwhelming, and that, he'd try to run away from it, or he's trying to just find a safe place for him, trying to differentiate between what is really there and then his reality. And so
So was that almost like hallucinations?
yeah, a lot of hallucinations. And we found out his body actually takes a lot of the foods and creates opium in his body. And so it was creating a lot of hallucinations for him. And to him, it's real what's going on. That's what he's seeing. And we're looking around going, why is he acting like this? This is absolutely crazy.
Is he still on a gluten-free diet then?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because I would say, because the opioid effect with the gluten and the casein is very...
Yes. And he's gone off of it before, And then he realizes, oops, shouldn't have done that. You know, the brain fog comes back really fast.
Will
and
hallucinations come back still?
He does have much more vivid dreams, especially at night when he's had those. And so he's right now in a place where he sticks to a gluten-free diet, and he notices a huge difference. And then I've also had him do some parasite testing, and he was positive for those. And so I've done some frequency sessions with him to eliminate those parasites. And he said he noticed a big difference.
Did you notice a difference?
Well, he lives here, and I live in California, so I wasn't able to see him on a day-to-day basis, but from what he was telling me, his boss saw a huge difference in his work because he's an electrician, small details really matter. And he was able to do more work in a shorter amount of time, and his work was correct, and he noticed he didn't have to use as much energy to focus and concentrate. And there were days where he said he just wasn't as tired afterwards. And so it made a really huge difference for him.
Like his productivity too and stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, Lisa Ann here, and I'm interrupting this podcast episode because I want to let you know, if you are not already on my YouTube channel, I want to make sure that you go over there and check out all my content, because this podcast episode I drop once a month, but over on my YouTube channel, I'm dropping weekly tips and tricks and extra content for you that's helpful for you or your children or whoever it is that you are trying to serve. And also make sure that you go into the description below and grab my free gift that I have for you. Did you do that? Was that a remote session or was that an in-person session?
The frequency was definitely an in-person session. And so, yeah, I was able to do that while I came to Utah.
So that was my next question, is how did you start getting into what I mean, obviously you've had a lot of struggles with your son, you've had a lot of your own health issues, so did that just, since like half of us, or all of us moms, we spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours researching, it's like you almost like just by default become a master in whatever.
Exactly. I think we all become a master in like nutrients and how the body chemistry works, and we spend so much time researching and looking stuff up. We tend to learn and know more than even some doctors, because they've got so many patients to see. You know, any webinar that was available, I was jumping on to hear all these different doctors and different tests that go on. And then I was at a point when we moved to the Mojave Desert where, I mean, I was like 250 pounds and I didn't feel good. And I was like, why am I feeling this way, you know? And come to find out, okay, side effects from the medication I was taking, it causes cravings, it causes weight gain, it causes depression, it causes organ failure. Oh, great. Can you make me feel any worse? You know, how can I help myself? And then found out, oh, these medications also burn through a lot of minerals very quickly. So, yeah, I need to supplement in some minerals that might help with sleeping. And it's amazing what a good night's sleep can do for a person. And then I was raised in a very Western medicine home. My mom was a surgical nurse. So when I started getting into nutrition and the voodoo stuff, you know, all the herbs and the power of foods, yeah, my mom definitely had a problem with that. My husband has been great. He's just been like, yeah, I'm lucky I've got the crazy witch doctor that, you know, around all the time, and supported me in anything I wanted to try, and anything that was going to help our kids or myself, he was all for. And so, yeah, we've had goats, and we got the goats because when the kids were normal, we got goat milk. And they definitely, that was easier on their stomachs than having regular milk. And they weren't as sick as much. And then ran into an herbalist down in the Mojave Desert. You would think he was a homeless person. He was actually a doctor. He had a beard down to here and grew his own herbs and put together, I think it was like a fire cider for a cough syrup. The problem is the kids loved it. And they said it tasted like root beer. And I had to call them up. They had a really bad cough, heavy congestion. and he dropped me off a half gallon. And you're supposed to give them, 1 teaspoon like every couple of hours. They drank the whole half gallon. And I was so freaked out. They were passed out on the floor. They were asleep. I call them up, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I got to take them to ER. And he was laughing so hard. He goes, well, you've got the rest of the day off. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, are they asleep? I go, yeah. He goes, they're probably going to wet the bed, and they're going to go to the bathroom a lot. He goes, but they'll sleep the rest of the day. And they did. And, it was the next, is Dr. John going to bring us more root beer? But it worked. And I would have to hide it because I don't want them drinking a gallon of it all at once. But boy, getting the mucus out and helping them to get better, it was great. So I started running into people who were teaching me about herbs and who were teaching me about nutrition, and started thinking, what have I got to lose? I've been in medical my whole life, and it's got me where I'm at. And I want to be back up here. I want to feel good. I want to have lots of energy. I want my kids to feel good. I want them to be able to go out and play baseball if they want, or go to dance, or go swimming, or go to birthday parties, instead of missing so much school because they're sick all the time, and that they don't understand things in school, and school becomes drudgery instead of a place that's fun where they can meet people and have friends and play. So it was a lot of trial and error.
So how long have you been doing what you're doing then right now?
I was a mentor parent for TACO for about 20 years. And as I was learning about iridology and herbs and foods, and just recently this year, I started my own business. My goal is to really get out and help people, let them know that, there are possibilities and there is hope out there.
So do you do coaching, or what type of?
I do coaching. I do one-on-one nutrition counseling. I do group counseling. I teach people alternatives that a lot of people don't know. They think, how would I fix, a salad if I didn't have it in a bag that I just pulled off the shelf? I'm like, well, you can go to your farmer's market and you can buy the carrots and the celery. That's going to take so much time. I go, but you spend the same amount of time at the grocery store. They go, well, yeah, but everything's put together. I go, you can wash and chop up the vegetables in like 5-10 minutes. It doesn't take.
So do you I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but almost like I wouldn't say like a cooking class, but maybe like a type of like little workshops that you do?
I haven't done a cooking class yet. I may do that sometime in the future. I'm getting recipes together so that, like people, I let them know you can use romaine lettuce instead of bread. You can use the thin rice papers, put those in some water, and have your chopped up cabbage and carrots and whatever vegetables you want, onions and hummus, and roll that up like you do, just like if you were going out for sushi or something. Mm-hmm. And give them recipes to make like a healthy nut sauce. But, spaghetti squash is a great option if you can't have pastas. So is zucchini noodles. They've got sweet potatoes you can use. You've got cassava flour you can use. And so just putting these recipes out there and letting them know it doesn't take hours and hours to make something that tastes good that is going to help you to feel better. It's the same amount of time as if you were to open a bag and dump out a salad, except it's real food that's still good for you.
Plus, if you have more energy, you have more time.
Yeah, yes, you do.
You're not in bed all the time.
Right, and you're not going, oh, what am I going to do? I know I've got to do something important, but I can't think, and you got the brain fog. Mm-hmm. And that sucks the motivation out of you, and it takes so much time. Like you said, you actually start, how much is your time worth? Mm-hmm. And do you want to spend it being sick, or do you want to spend it getting better?
So what type of person, like what's your ideal client? Like what type of person are you trying to attract?
Usually people who are in families or who are in like their mid-30s and above, who are sick and tired and stuck in their health. So, and what a lot of people don't know is it is not normal to have year-round allergies and insomnia and bloating and stomach aches and joint pain. I know many doctors will just go, oh, that's just, you're 30 now, and, so it's normal to have some brain fog. It's normal to have joint pain. No, it's not. So
Yeah, I know. That's kind of like one of my things, like it's not normal.
right.
It's
not
common.
It's not normal to grind your teeth at night or to have sleep apnea. Okay? But let's get rid of some of these parasites or molds or viruses.
I was going to say, what do you think is behind sleep apnea?
I think there's multiple problems behind it. Some of it can be due to being overweight, definitely. I've seen a lot of parasites and molds, which, depending on where people are from.
Would that be like more in their sinuses?
Sinuses, lungs, and even we can have parasites, and I know this sounds really nasty, really gross, but if you have a lot of dental work, you've got parasites in your mouth.
Yeah, from like the cavitations and everything.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of things because each tooth is connected to all your
Right.
organs and stuff, and so most people don't realize to look at their teeth like as a source of their chronic issues.
And so, like you said, what is one of the main things that every teenager looks forward to as they're got to have those wisdom teeth pulled before you turn 18, right?
Oh, okay. So my son, my 16-year-old, so my 25-year-old. So when we don't have insurance, which is like right now, we go to Mexico because my husband's Mexican. We go every year, so we have a dentist, and I had two of my wisdom teeth pulled on one side. The other one I had a wisdom tooth that was missing.
Okay.
So I had to have the partner pulled out because it wasn't going to have a partner.
Right.
The other two are still there. My husband had his were hurting. He had to have some taken out. I don't know, 2 or 4. My oldest son, his were really bothering him, so he had to have his out. So we took him to Mexico. My son, who's autistic, we just left him alone, but his teeth got really crooked. But anyway, my youngest one, he's 16. We just took him this summer to the dentist, and we took him to in Mexico. We took him to have an X-ray. He has no wisdom teeth, so we don't even have to worry about it. We're so happy, and he has really straight teeth anyway. And so we don't have to worry about them coming in or having to take them out or anything. So we're really excited about that.
The unique thing that my husband is one of 9. And he has 7 sisters, and he had 1 brother. Everybody and all of his siblings have super straight teeth, except for him. He was the only one that was vaccinated and not nursed.
No, he was not nursed. And you know what? I wasn't really nursed. My mom couldn't nurse me, and I had very crooked teeth.
Yeah, and they have linked those two together, and a lot of our children nowadays...
Because it helps form, that nursing helps form your mouth.
Right, and a lot of our children nowadays, they've had all their wisdom teeth pulled. They're coming in crooked, but they weren't nursed. Parents are working, and they were heavily vaccinated in order to get into daycare. Mm-hmm. And so I think those are 2 big components to how you see all of a sudden you've got all these crooked teeth. It's a huge industry. It's kind of like a rite of passage of being a teenager now. You got to get your braces on, and you want them on early. And then you got to get your wisdom teeth pulled on your senior year of high school before you're 18 and go off to college, right?
Yeah, and it's funny, like I was watching, I think like America's Got Talent or something. They had a whole group of kids from South Africa. I think it was South Africa, might have been another country in Africa, but and whenever you see the kids from there, they always have beautiful straight white teeth. Their diets are different.
Yeah,
they're nursing forever.
Right.
And so.
Yeah, and I'm like, we need to get back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it would be, I know over in Europe, once you have a baby, you are on maternity leave for like the first year. And I think now with having so much tech, it, for a lot of jobs, it would be easier for moms to work from home.
My husband he was the stay-at-home dad because, well, in the beginning it was going to be until like the oldest one got into kindergarten or something, but
Right.
because we had the kid with special needs, it ended up being for 20 years. But he was really good with when I had the babies because I was teaching, so I would go to school really early, start working. Before the bell rang, he would bring them to me. I would nurse them before the bell rang. I would nurse them at lunchtime, and I would, if I was going to stay late, he would bring them to me after school, and I would nurse them. We didn't live that far, and so I exclusively nursed my kids while I was teaching.
That's great that you had that opportunity
Yeah,
to do that.
yeah, it's great. Like, it sounded like your husband was pretty supportive too. It's the one thing that I remember at a DAN conference. One of the doctors at the front he said, look around, he said, where are all the dads?
Ah.
And it wasn't because the dads were staying home watching the kids while the moms were there. My husband was at I think he was even at that conference at one time, but in general, it's like the moms do all the work. The moms are the ones really trying to save their kids, and a lot of times we have some great dads. My husband's very supportive.
Right.
But there's a lot of dads that need to realize that they have to be on board or whatever, because there's a lot of sabotaging that goes on.
It's a lot of stress when you have a child that has so much special needs. And so the divorce rate in the autism is very high. But also I think part of the stress comes from you've got one parent that needs to work full-time or more to help pay for some of these tests and doctors that your insurance isn't covering, while the other one is trying to keep the household together, but doing all this research also at the same time to find out where's this community, where are these doctors, what's the new test, what's going on, so I can get my kid on the waiting list, or try some of this stuff at home and see if it'll help. Is that the one key that I need, or is that part of the key that's needed to unlock this lock to help them from regression? And it's really tough. When we were going through this time, my husband was working 100 hours plus a week, and it wasn't because he wanted to. It was because between my seizures and my son having autism, it was expensive. And, things we did that we thought the insurance was going to cover, and then they said, oh, you live out of area, we're not covering that. Oh, that's news to me.
So at what point were your seizures better? Or are they better?
They're better now, much better now. It wasn't until after we moved up to at the base of the mountains and got out of Ridgecrest that they became better. Part of it was because I met a neurologist at a TACA conference, and she was a pediatric neurologist. I had an aura, so I was about ready to have a seizure, and I was surrounded by about 200 doctors, and most of them were neurologists, and they wanted to know my story. What's going on? Why are you having these? And they all kept telling me I needed to see this one doctor. They all repeated her name. So I'm like, okay, she must be really well known. She must really know what she's doing. I didn't think I'd get in to see her because she was a pediatric neurologist. I actually met her office manager.
You said, I'm 13.
And her office manager totally surprised me, opened up his phone and called her. He had her personal number and said, hey, I've got this mom here who has autistic son, but she has epilepsy, been having it most of her life, and nobody can figure it out. Will you see her? And she goes, yeah, I'll see her, make an appointment, have her send me over her insurance. She took a look at our insurance and just said, they ran it, insurance denied me because it was a pediatric neurologist. And she just said, okay, well, this is my normal rate. Now, she spends 2 hours with you. That's unheard of. She read my whole medical record from the time I was born until the time I saw her. Thousands and thousands of pages. She knew every date and detail. And she said to me, "You're vaccine injured. You have every red flag for vaccine injury." She goes, "I don't know why they didn't ever tell you this. It's clear as day." She goes, "I know it doesn't go along with the standard protocol of care, but," she says, "first let's take out gluten and dairy, see if that helps at all." She goes, "I don't know that it's going to, but it's the easiest one to do, and I want to see if it helps." I go, "Okay." So I removed gluten and dairy. I didn't have the bloating that I had before, and some of the inflammation went away. But then she says, "Now what I'm going to ask you to do is much harder. First of all, you're going to stop being vegetarian." And
you were a vegetarian?
I was vegetarian because I thought, okay, maybe this will help, just eat all these really healthy foods. She goes, "You have neuroinflammation. You need as much good fats as possible. So tell me now if you're going to do that, because if you're not, I'm going to kick you off my patient list and I will take another waitlisted patient." I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'll good. I'll do exactly as you said. So my husband was so happy. He was like, "Oh, we're going to go have a burger and you're going to have a double." and then the doctor goes, "Remember, no cheese, no bun." He goes, "That's fine with me." And so we did it. And then she calls me up one day. She goes, "Okay, I want you to stop eating eggs." I go, "Eggs? I thought you wanted me to eat good fats. Eggs have a lot of..." She says, "Eggs are also in the flu shot."
Oh.
And she said that, she goes, "I think you have a spike protein from some of the vaccines you would have had, and I think that's causing your seizures." All right, I'll stop eating eggs. So at the time, I thought that meant scrambled eggs, omelets, fried eggs, poached eggs. I didn't realize it meant no mayonnaise, no pasta, no bread, no sauces, no ice cream, eggs and chocolates, eggs and everything. And she's like, "Yes, no eggs, period." And so I was like, oh. And then I didn't have any seizures for almost a year.
Wow.
And so I went out to see my daughter in Arizona, and I was like, my daughter took me to this really good restaurant for omelets. And so then I ate an omelet. And then at lunchtime we went to another restaurant, and it had like eggs in the dressing for the salad.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day I went out to another restaurant, and they had really good French toast and pancakes. I had that, and then I had 3 seizures.
Wow.
And my husband was like, "Did you not take your medicines?" And I just had something that told me, "It's the eggs. Stay away from the eggs." And I go, "It's the eggs."
Okay, so yeah, because you know what I just heard in a recent webinar, somebody was, and I don't know why I never put this together, because I had heard like peanut allergies, or because one of the vaccines was cultivated in peanut oil or something.
Right.
But they said that whatever you have in your system at the time that you have the vaccine, like let's say you have been eating bread or whatever, then those are the things that you become sensitive to also. Like that's another thing, that you can become sensitive to the foods that you had been eating.
Right. And so that's how I learned that it was the eggs that were a problem for me. And so it was just taking everything out and making everything ourselves so that we could, and it's worked.
So it's pretty much just been the eggs that...
Eggs, and get rid of the eggs, and then I also take, I have a CBD I take that's specifically for seizures.
Oh. Is there something in it that
It's the terpenes from the different marijuana plants that address seizures.
Oh.
So it's a blend of different species of marijuana.
Do you have to worry about your MSG intake then? Because I know seizures and MSG are like...
I do, because for me it causes my blood pressure to go through the roof. And so I'll make my own ranch seasoning, and I keep that in a jar, so I know that doesn't have any MSG or taco seasoning or whatever. And I don't
But you haven't seen a connection with your seizures?
No, mine were more hormone related. and then all the eggs.
Oh, the hormone related? So,
Yes.
like, you had, like, monthly seizures?
Every 6 weeks.
Like a monthly migraine? Like, I
Yeah.
would, yeah, I was...
Every 6 weeks I would have a seizure.
With your hormones?
My cycle was so off that it would be right before I started my cycle.
Oh, so that, yeah, because that would be like when I would get like a migraine. And I
Right.
can never figure out the exact mechanism of that. And one time I heard somebody ask some other guy a question, like a doctor guy, that question, like, what is the mechanism? But he missed the point and he answered the wrong question. I'm like, no, that's not what that person was asking, because I had the same question, like, what is the mechanism why every month we would get a migraine? And I don't know if it's because you need more magnesium at that point, or like...
It's also the moon, because the moon, as we get a full moon, you'll have some people that get insomnia and get migraines, joint pain.
Well, that would be parasite based.
And it is. Parasites become very active at a full moon and go with the gravitational pull, because we tend to produce more serotonin during a full moon. But our cycles also are every 28 days, and every 28 days there's a full moon. And for some people that brings on a migraine, and is it when the estrogen level peaks? For some it's when it drops and the progesterone gets higher. So every person's a little bit different. For me, it was low progesterone. And so then when the doctor, instead of putting me on progesterone, put me on wild yam extract. And then I didn't have any seizures for like over a year. The problem happened when the pharmaceuticals pulled it from the shelves and she couldn't prescribe me a clean source.
Oh, yeah, because I actually recently got some, but it has like a scent to it, and it's like I'm not, but yeah, I think the one I have is like from Australia or something.
I actually have a company that Barbara O'Neill supports and backs, and it's from here in Utah, and that has the wild yam extract cream.
What was well, because I think I got one brand, and I got two different ones, and one of them was through one of her posts, so it must, or through that, because I go, well, I know she supports that, because I watched one of her whole things on hormones, which was fascinating. So,
right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that for me worked, and.
Do you just put it, like, what do you put it on your arm? Or
I put it on my wrist, and then you got to make sure to move it every
so
time you apply it. Okay, so it's just something at night I do, and it helps.
What I've been trying to do is isolate different things, so I'm trying to do, like, every month and, like, focusing on something different, because I spent my whole life, like, mixing things, like with my son. Like, I just did, at 3 years old, everything. Like,
and so you don't know which one's working.
Exactly. The doctor said that, but I was like, I don't care. I just want him better. Like, so.
Yep.
But
I remember going through that, and then the problem is something worked, and you can see a difference, and you're like, okay, maybe if I just keep giving him all this, and then the next month it's like, okay, something's not working. Well, which one is it? Which one do I remove?
Actually, the Super Nuthera, the Kirkman Labs, not Costco.
Right.
Kirkman Labs, because they were like the first company to create products for the spectrum, from Dr. Emlyn. But the Super Nuthera, I think that's the one he was on, because it was probably the first thing. But that was when we noticed he was like 3. And for the first time, I remember being at the mall, and he was ahead of us, but then he stopped and waited for us, and he didn't just like run.
Right.
And I was like, oh, that's different. Like, that was big difference for us. And it was 3 days after he started taking that. That was the one thing out of everything we've ever done his whole life that I noticed like a direct correlation.
Right.
So, yeah. But most things are kind of hard, because, like, putting it all together, you're like, I'm not really sure what. But it's so synergistic, too. Yeah. Just like the toxin, sometimes it's not the one thing. It's like the combination of everything.
Right.
And, yeah, so.
So it's like a reducing toxins, and then they're getting the nutrients they need, And it's like all of a sudden they have this great day, and then the next day it's like, nope. Or you'll go and maybe it'll be a great week, and then after that you don't feel
I
as
read
good.
in Dr. Lynch's Dirty Genes book once, like his son, like they figured out he was supplementing him with some amino acid. I don't remember what it was, but for one of the SNPs, I guess, that he had. And then after after maybe 20 days or 28 days or a month, there was like the behavior, like he had a big drop or big regression
Right.
or whatever, and they realized that he had accumulated too much of
Yep.
it. So that's another consideration.
Right. Right, because their bodies don't know how to use it, and then don't know how to, get rid of it. And so then we keep giving it to them because they've been deficient, thinking, oh, they're going to need to take this forever, and then they build it up and they get toxic of it. So yeah, finding the dose it can be really difficult. That, oh, you give this like once every other day instead of once every day.
Or give them a whole week off or
Right.
something. I guess maybe for the body to metabolize it or clear it or
Right,
something.
and usually once they get rid of the toxins, then it's okay, now the body's starting to talk to each other and they can assimilate it better. And now you got to develop those pathways because they're not used to working.
So if you had to give parents advice, like the one thing maybe, like what would that be?
There'd actually be two things.
Okay.
The first thing would be get them tested for parasites. There hasn't been one single child on the spectrum who didn't have an overload of parasites. Finding out which parasites they have. Okay, I know there's a big group out there. Some say use, Fenbend. Some say use ivermectin. However, if you just blindly give them ivermectin or Fenbend, and that it doesn't cover the parasites that they have, now we're developing super parasites, just like we've got super bacteria. Okay, that it's gonna take a lot to get them rid of those because they've built up a resistance to it. The other thing would be get them on GCMF. And those two would really, really help them along with their diet.
So how can people find you or find out more about you or learn more about you?
I'm on Mohr Natural, MOHR, natural.com, and /free gifts, and they can receive the book on the hidden parasites within. That gives them a little bit of information about parasites and actually how we get them. You basically have to live in a plastic bubble if you want to avoid parasites, and that's just not realistic. Everybody has things they need to get done during the day, and they're everywhere. They're here to stay, but if we can manage them, that's when we're going to take our life back.
Well, it was so happy to get to know you, my new friend, and we had so much in common, and so this was really fun. So thank you for coming.
Sure, anytime, Lisa.
Hey, thanks for watching, and I just want to remind you that all of the giveaways that we have talked about in this episode are going to be found in the description below. Make sure that you check that out and subscribe so you are the first to know when a new episode drops. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next month.